Well, hello and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. I'm going to start with a question. When you have to say no to someone else, do you find yourself feeling compelled to write a dissertation to defend your no, sort of convincing them that you have a right to say no? Well, if you're nodding your head, then this episode is for you. In today's episode, I'm going to be breaking down the differences between convincing when it comes to a boundary or a preference and providing context. I'm also going to be exploring what drives the need to attempt to convince others and how you can step back from this behavior to be more self-directed and less approval-seeking. So, if you are new to my channel, welcome. Please introduce yourself right here in the comments because we are a friendly bunch. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do. Just hit that little bell so when something new comes out, you will not miss it. If you don't know me, my name is Terri Cole and I am the author of Boundary Boss, the book that's right there that you can get at boundarybossbook.com. And thank you for all of your questions and all of your comments. You know I love it and I read every single one. I love to highlight them. So today I'm highlighting one from Rachel A. And she wrote this under the episode about why codependents and narcissists can't break up. And she just says, you hit the nail on the head, Terri. This is so incredibly validating. Thank you. Well, you are welcome, Rachel. Thank you for being here. And before we get started, I want to make sure that you subscribe to my channel, hit the bell so you get notified when anything new comes out. And also, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Let's move into today's content. Okay, convincing someone of something and providing context are really easily confused, but they are not at all the same thing. So you might not be aware that you're even doing it, right? That you're suddenly approval seeking, trying to convince someone if you have to say no, that you're building a case, right? You want everyone to think that what you're doing is okay, the change in your career is okay, that your relationship is okay. It's like this unconscious seeking of approval. And we can do it in almost any situation. Many years ago, Vic and I were at a Chopra Center retreat. I think we were in Taos, New Mexico. It was a week-long thing. And we were talking about being self-determined. And Deepak said something that really changed my life. And he just said, remember, you never have to convince anyone of anything. And I have to say that totally blew my mind. Because until that moment, I didn't realize that for decades, in one form or fashion, I was trying to convince everyone of everything. Like I wanted everyone to approve of the choices I was making or the relationship that I was in. And if they didn't, I would be super pissed that they weren't approving. I was completely unaware that I was constantly, unconsciously building a case to prove that what I was doing was the right thing, as if the person outside of me could possibly know what the right thing is for me. And I wasn't only trying to convince people that I had the right to say no, right? It wasn't just that. I was essentially an open book for anyone who would sort of throw shade or give disapproval or even hint at that, where I would just naturally jump into building a case of saying why I was doing it and why it was such a good idea. Like the amount of bandwidth that went out being worried and trying to convince others that what was going on in my life was okay was ridiculous and exhausting. So why do we try to convince others to agree with us, right? Why is that part of how we do it? Listen, approval seeking, what does it come from? It comes from insecurity. It comes from not wanting to be rejected. It comes from fear of being judged. I mean, fear is a huge driving behavior. I mean, it's a huge driver behind these behaviors. We want people to think that what we're doing is okay. We want to feel good about the decisions that we're making, but seeking this kind of validation leaves us really vulnerable to people who will make us feel bad. simply because they can, right? It also will attract people who always have a counter argument, right? Or who will just judge you. But you know what I mean? When you're saying something, I know you have people in your life, or you have had, where they just seem to always take the other side, no matter what it is that you're saying. So convincing, building a case, all of that is approval seeking, and it almost always puts other people in the position like when it's sort of you're asking for them to approve of you or your decision, and it gives them the power to withhold that approval. So I wanted to get really, really clear about the distinction between, because providing context is something that is healthy if you want to do it, depending on the relationship, depending on the person. And that really has to be your decision. But I can't tell you, in 2.5 decades as a psychotherapist and in my courses, I've seen this pattern over and over. Now, it's confusing to your relationships, right? It creates frustration. It is bad for your self-esteem because we're really making ourselves vulnerable to people who we don't even know if they're emotionally trustworthy or not. And it's bad for your relationships because most people don't even want that power. I mean, some do, but these are unconscious, relational, interactive patterns. And so much of the time, we don't even know that it's happening. We don't even know what's going on. We're just a part of it. And then we leave that conversation and we're so frustrated and we're so angry because trying to convince all the time, seeking approval all the time, creates disordered emotional boundaries. Or we can say it stems from having disordered emotional boundaries, depending on how you look at it. So let's talk about how and when it's appropriate to provide context instead of convincing, right? Because the truth is, negotiating is different than convincing. So let's just get clear that I'm not talking about compromising. I'm not talking about negotiating for what you want. I'm talking about seeking. We're trying to elicit the approval of others. So the first thing you've got to do is be discerning. The same way that not everyone should be in the VIP section of your life, be discerning about whose opinion you value. Who do you want weighing in on your life, right? Stop asking people what they think of your decisions, your ideas. Stop presenting them as something that they can weigh in on if you don't feel that way, if that's not what you're asking. And if it is what you're asking, we're going to get to that, you've got to do it in a mindful and specific way. But we want to be discerning, because if you end up making yourself vulnerable to people who are really critical, who are unhappy in their life, who are not successful in their life, they can be very negative about what it is that you're doing. And it's really all judgment. And their comments will really be in so much less about you, right? And more of a reflection of how they feel about their own life. And listen, everybody projects in some way, shape, or form, right? We all come from our view of the world and our life experiences. But when you have people who are really critical and you know that, don't put yourself in the line of fire. So be discerning. You cannot care about what everyone thinks. Look at their lives. Look at what they're doing. Look at what they have or have not built. Look at how happy they are or are not. Take that into consideration. This is probably the most important step to go from convincing to providing context, is to be discerning about whose opinion you seek. And you can get very skilled at sharing things with people without having it be an invitation for them to give you unasked for advice or criticism, which we'll talk about. Providing context I just want to break down a little bit why. Why would we do that? And what does it mean? Providing context means you're giving more information about, let's say, why you've said no or why you're changing something in your life. I provide context in my most important relationships, in the friendships I care about, with Vic, my husband, right? Of course he knows, obviously I have a pretty healthy relationship. He knows I have a right to say no, but I want him to understand if I'm saying no to something, and he asks me for very little in our relationship, and I rarely would ever say no because he's such an easygoing buzzies, but let's just say I had to say no. I will always provide context because I'm not saying no to punish him. There must be a reason. I don't want to go to that event late because I have a presentation in the morning or I have an early interview or whatever it is. So providing context is because I don't want him to misunderstand or jump to conclusions. And really, in a healthy relationship, in all of my healthy friendships, I want the person to understand me, not as a justification for why I'm opting out of something, but providing context can deepen the intimacy in a relationship. It deepens the understanding that you have together. So that's where it's most appropriate. In a work situation, if you can't do something that is expected of you, providing context will, I think usually it has people accept what you have to say because they have a greater understanding. But again, we are not convincing. Providing context means you're sharing some of the backstory or some of your reasoning for what it is that you're doing. Make sense? Yes. Keep in mind, you do it from a strategic place. You do it strategically in the relationships that matter to you. And so one of the really important aspects of this is that we have to be really mindful of where are you automatically or compulsively convincing, trying to get everyone to think that what you're doing is okay. So we have to slow down. That is definitely a requirement to make this shift between convincing and providing context. And keep in mind, you're going to be doing, when you bring this from the basement, your unconscious mind, to the main part of your house, you're going to be doing a lot less approval seeking, because that's the point, is we're trying not to be approval seeking, because really the only approval we need in life, or the most important person's approval, is your own. And I think that was a new concept for me in my 20s, my late 20s probably, where I never thought about it that way. I really didn't understand how much I was doing this and how stressful it really was. Okay, moving into, let's say you do want someone's opinion, or you want to know what they think about the person you're dating or whatever it is. You have to ask the right question, right? We don't want to leave the question open to just, what do you think? If it has to do with something, let's say you gave a talk somewhere, or some kind of performance thing, you can ask the question, how can I make it better? And again, because we're now being very discerning and we're not just asking like Aunt Betty what she thinks about our talk, right? Asking people whose opinion matters to you. So to ask for constructive criticism, a much better question than what do you think is, how can I make it better? You know, and you can be specific if you're asking your best friend what she thinks about the person you're dating. You can say, what do you think their good qualities are? What do you think their bad qualities are? You can be specific. Is there anything you observed that you want to share with me? Like, again, we're being specific about what information we're asking for, which I think gives you better feedback. But keep in mind, since now we're not asking everyone in the world what they think, you can be a lot less guarded, because hopefully you're only asking people's opinion in emotionally safe relationships where they're not going to just judge you or disapprove of you for the sake of doing so. And the last thing I want to say about this is that, listen, you are the boss of you ultimately, right? Since we only have control over ourselves, speaking up and clearly asserting our desired boundaries is the goal, right? This is one of the true talk tips in Boundary Boss book, that the goal is asserting ourselves and telling the truth about how we feel. The other person's response will reveal what they are willing or capable of doing. Can they accept your no if you're saying no? If they can't accept your no, it doesn't mean you don't say no. Now you are more aware of what they're capable of by being more truthful rather than trying to convince them it's okay that you're saying no. Got it? So, providing context means sharing information so that you are more deeply understood and known, because you know what? You are so worth deeply knowing. And going around seeking approval from everyone in the world is really a bummer. Takes up way too much of your bandwidth in life. Who has that bandwidth to give away? Trust me, you do not. So the end of the end is that giving context is simply adding a layer of information to help the other person better understand you. And maybe it's a boundary request that you're providing context for. Maybe it's something else. But it's your life. So if you go through it, being self-determined, knowing you are the boss of you, because ultimately you are the only one who has to live with your decisions. You are the only one. Yes, sometimes those decisions impact others, and that's when we have to have conversations. But in the end, because a lot of what I've been talking about in this episode is where we just want everyone to think what we're doing is great. We are open for everyone's feedback. And I think that it's very important that you're not open for everyone's feedback. And if you share like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go away on this solo retreat for 5 days, and your Aunt Betty or somebody says, oh, I don't think that that's a good idea. You can then go into saying, oh, hey, I'm actually not seeking input. I just wanted to tell you because I'm excited about it. I wasn't asking you your opinion on this. And there's nothing wrong with establishing that boundary. And in fact, you must, if you are not seeking people's input. So this is all about clarity, people. So I want to know what you thought of this episode. What do you think about the difference between convincing and providing context? Have you struggled with this in your life? You can leave me comments here. You know, if you like this, please share it with the people in your life. I mostly hang out on Instagram and on Facebook, so feel free to repost it, share it in your world. I hope you have an amazing week. And as always, take care of you.